All right, welcome and thank you all for joining us this morning or this afternoon for our annual planning workshop series. Today is our final of 3 workshops, and today we're talking about proving your plan's impact. If you've missed our first two workshops, not to worry. The recording and the slides are now available up on the main landing page where you registered for this webinar. But I will also be including a link to all of the resources in the follow-up email to today's session. So while having a solid plan with clear goals and objectives and an action plan for marketing to achieve them, which is what we covered in parts 1 and 2, you also need to be clear on how you're going to measure, adapt, and report on your efforts and how you're going to tie that impact to the budget you're given, most importantly, so that you get more next year. So that is what we're going to be covering today. And once again, for this third of our installment, the folks at Inverter are really proud to be working with Uptempo on this because the combination of, our methodologies and their technology are really what can make annual planning sing for you at your organization. So before we get into it, 2 quick things. So one, as always, we will be leaving time at the end of today's session for the Q&A. So please add your questions during the presentation at any point to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. I will remind you all to do that throughout today's presentation so we can have a good discussion at the end. And then last but not least, I will be sending out the recording and the slides following today's session. So yes, you will get everything so that you can leverage all of this intel for your own planning processes. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. So we have Kathy Mackey, EVP of Innovation and co-founder of Inverta. Also from Inverta, we have Shelly Kaleza, VP of Account Management. And last but not least, they are joined once again today by Jim Williams, CMO at Uptempo. So that's about enough for me. Until we get to the Q&A. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to get us kicked off.
Hey, thank you, Jessica. Just as a recap for the first 2 webinars we did, the first one was on, we showed the annual plan on a page, which outlines how to summarize and articulate your plan to the rest of the organization. It's the best way we've seen how to distill a 100-page slide deck of your marketing plan into a way to communicate to the organization what's marketing doing, how you're contributing to the goals. From there, we went into basically how to build an annual campaign plan strategy based on what was in your annual plan. And think of it as a roadmap for your team to know basically how do you take those big goals and turn it into reality. Because if you do not do that, your team are not mind readers and they'll be playing the, I wonder what that goal meant guessing game, which is not where you want to be. And then we wrapped up with the quarterly plan. So this is what falls out from your annual campaign strategy. And essentially, it takes your plan into action. And this is your reality check. This is where you're outlining in details, the tactics, the channels, the personas, the segments. And this is where you start to discover if the big plans you outlined in the annual plan, the goals you outlined in annual plan, what we call top-down planning, actually is achievable with the plans you're going to execute, which is bottom-up planning, which is a perfect way to turn it over to Shelly, because she's going to talk to you about really the viability and the impact of how do you show that for your plan and for your team. And you're going to do top-down reporting and bottom-up reporting. So Shelly, I'll take it away.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I actually want to talk about are the 3 different levels of reporting. So if you want to move to the next slide, you should see those here, which are campaign, department, and executive level KPIs. And each one of those KPIs serve a distinct purpose. So at the campaign level, those KPIs are early warning signs. They're how are my tactics performing? And at the department level, those KPIs are all about showing your overall marketing strategy effectiveness. Is it working? And then at that executive level, those KPIs are showing marketing's contribution to the overall business growth. And so I think the key to maintaining clear relationships between all of those is really important. So you really want to think about how does your campaign metric ladder into that departmental goal? And how does that departmental goal support those business objectives at the highest level? So alignment between them ensures that you're not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data, but you're actually driving real business results. And Kathy did mention that I'm going to talk about bottom up and top down. So I think first I'm going to talk about bottom up reporting on the next slide. And so if you think about bottom up reporting, this is the type of reporting that shows how your tactical execution builds up to achieve those strategic goals. So when you think about tactical metrics, think about things like click-through rates on your ads or conversion rates on your landing pages, cost per lead by channel. I've also got here content engagement rates. And those tactical metrics, they're going to tell if your individual marketing activities are actually working. But I think the real power in those metrics is when they roll up and help you tell a bigger story at that strategic insights level. Those would be things like, how are these different channels working together to move prospects through my funnel? Or which combination of activities is most effectively generating the leads, the quality leads that I need? Or where am I seeing the best ROI? And should I really increase investment in something, or should I decrease it in some things that seem to not be hitting the mark? So I think this bottom up reporting keeps your team honest, and it helps them see how their actual activities are getting to those larger goals. And if you see any gaps here, you can actually adjust your tactics pretty quickly before you miss the bigger goals that you have above it. I want to give an example because I think that's helped in the past sort of visualize like what would that look like in real application. And so here's an example, and you can see based on the campaign KPIs we're targeting, we're going to track where is our traffic coming from, how are we converting the traffic that's coming in, and how are visitors engaging with our content. Those are the three things we're going to look at. So first, let's look at traffic source analytics. And that's important to look at because not all traffic is created equal, in my opinion. So you're going to track your organic traffic growth to gauge SEO effectiveness, or you're going to look at paid traffic performance because that's going to show you how your media spend is doing. Is it efficient? Referral traffic, that's going to indicate whether your partnerships and content syndication are working well together. So those metrics are going to tell us whether we're trending towards that 20% web traffic growth goal that you can see that I've set at the top of the page. For conversion tracking metrics, that will show how effective you're moving people through the funnel. So you might want to look at form completion because that'll tell you how easy people are engaging with your content. Or CTA click-throughs that will tell whether the message is compelling or not. Are you getting people to actually click? And then path analysis is going to show where people might be getting stuck. So do you have too many clicks that are required for them to get to what you want them to engage with? So all of those metrics should combine to create progress towards that 5% conversion improvement target. And then the last example is over in content engagement metrics. And there you're going to measure how deeply people are interacting with your content. So are they spending meaningful time? Are they downloading at a rate that's telling you, hey, they like my content? When you look at the return visitor percentages, are you building an engagement with that audience? So all of those signals should roll up to tell you if you're tracking to that 35% content syndication engagement target. So really the beauty of this kind of reporting is that it's showing you early signs. So if you're not hitting engagement metrics at a content level, then you might need to adjust something as it relates because those are going to relate to your syndication goals. Or if traffic sources aren't performing well, then you might want to reallocate budget because that's going to affect your overall growth targets. When all of those metrics actually roll up successfully, they're validating that your awareness campaign's on track because that's what you're trying to drive. And if they're not rolling up, then you know exactly where to go. I think that that's why this is a really powerful way of looking at reporting because it really connects what people are doing daily. It makes those decisions really tied to that strategic goal. They can see the connection there. So with that, I actually want to move on to top down, which is a little bit different because that's starting with your big picture at the top and it's breaking it down into increasingly more specific actions. So the executive team is going to set that annual revenue growth target, and then marketing is actually going to translate that growth or that revenue goal into objectives like how many customers do we need to acquire? Or what's our target customer acquisition cost? Or what size does our pipeline need to be? And then we're going to break that down into further campaign goals. So, number of marketing qualified leads that you need per quarter, or the conversion rate that you need to maintain at each funnel stage, or something like campaign performance targets that will deliver the results that you're looking for. So, this cascading approach really ensures that your marketing activities tie back to that overall business objective at the top. So, let's look at an example of what that could be. The first thing that you really need to ask yourself is like, what are we ultimately trying to achieve? And that goal should align with the broader business objective, and it should give you clear direction on where your marketing efforts should go. So in this example, marketing is going to try and create awareness in the market. And here's how that would cascade down. So we're going to set campaign goals of increasing web traffic by 20%. So that's a foundational metric because traffic is often going to be your first indicator of whether a campaign is effective, whether it's really meeting the reach that you need it to reach. But if you don't really just want to look at traffic. You want to look at if that traffic is actually converting and are those people engaging. So for that, let's look at improving inquiry to engage conversion rate. And we're going to say we're going to increase it by 5%. So that's going to tell us whether or not we're attracting visitors, but not just any visitor, the right visitors. So it's one thing to really get people to the site, but it's really another to make sure that they're engaging. So that's what we're looking at there. And then secondly, we're going to look at a 35% of our content syndication leads engaging with our content hub. So that metric is going to bridge that gap between your outbound efforts and your owned media engagement. So when you hit that target, it's going to tell you that you're not just generating any kind of lead, but you're generating leads that are really interested in your thought leadership that you're putting out there or the solutions that you have to offer. And I think the beauty of top down is that it really creates those clear lines of sight. So everyone on your team actually sees how their specific efforts are tying back to those overall campaign goals. So that's a lot of detail on how to think about top down and bottom up reporting. I'm going to turn it back to Kathy, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that and your annual plan.
Thank you, Shelley. So what Shelley went through is basically each level KPI has a really distinct place in a framework. And what I want to walk you through is a framework, what I call the hierarchy of marketing reporting. And I saw a chart, visual like this a number of years ago, and it really changed how I thought about reporting. And imagine this as a ladder. And a lot of us would start at the bottom and work our way up. But I want you to rethink it. You want to start at the top and work your way down. And when I look at the top, you have things like business goals, you have revenue, profitability, market share, customer sat. Those are metrics that your executive committee cares about because that's how they make business decisions. And so if you want to basically have a seat at the table, you're going to have to discuss how marketing impacts, contributes, affects those metrics. And when you do that, you're going to see as a strategic business partner to them. Now, a lot of us, unfortunately, start at the bottom and we talk about our activities. And when that happens, you're just talking about what you did, not where you should be headed. And when you spend your time talking about the things you've done, the activities, and the associated costs, you're going to be viewed typically just as campaign production. You're not going to be seen as strategic. Now, I think where most of us sit as marketers is we all talk about how do we impact, affect, or contribute or influence pipeline. It's just a natural thing to do because we work tightly with sales. And so you run a lot of campaigns. You have awareness campaigns, engagement campaigns, demand, customer marketing, all types of things. And it's all in service of acquiring, growing, retaining customers, and talking about pipeline. Like we want to show how we're contributing to pipeline. And while that is really good and it's really important, if you focus 100% on pipeline, you're going to be viewing the organization as just sales support and sales enablement. And so you've got to draw a clear line of sight if you want to get the executive's attention between your activities, your campaigns, your objectives, to how you're really helping move the needle on these business goals. And I think that's what really makes the difference is you've got to tie those things together. Most executives do not come up through marketing and they don't understand when you start talking about all this other stuff. So you've got to make those connections for them. To do that, typically you're going to have two modes of reporting. You have an annual plan reporting, you have quarterly. Think an annual plan reporting is this is where you're headed. This is where you're stepping back and telling the big picture of where you're going. I look at it in 5 different areas. The first thing is, what are your business and marketing goals? And that's where you're sort of outlining, what is really important for business. Like maybe that's the revenue growth you're looking at. These are your North Star metrics. Maybe it's customer growth in a certain segment. Once you outline that, you want to talk about your strategy initiatives. These are the plays you're running. These are the major plays. This is where you're placing your bets. And it could be we're reimagining our brand so we can own a category. It could be we're expanding into new markets. But this one outline what are you doing to achieve those goals? The progress overview is this is where we stand. This is the impact we've had to date. So you might say, hey, we're tracking ahead of our customer acquisition goals, but we're falling short in maybe our retention goals. So you want to outline that. And the last two are insights and adjustments. This is basically what did we learn and how are we adapting? So it could be, hey, we had initial assumption of X, but Y has happened. Or we're going to reallocate some resources based on this. And so a lot of this first time annual reporting is all about, it's not always about hitting your numbers, but are you heading in the right direction? What adjustments are you making? Because you're getting real world insights as you roll this out, and they want to know how you're making those adjustments and how you plan to achieve those business outcomes. Annual plan reporting, I find it depends. There's a lot of factors. Sometimes it's every 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes it's every quarter. It really is going to depend on how your company works that way. The next one down, though, quarterly reporting actually happens quarterly. And this is where I look at is, it's your progress report. It's like on your Fitbit here, where you get those nice, satisfying progress or not so much progress updates. And I look at it the same way. So the first is your focus area. Like, what are the things you're taking on this quarter? What do you focus on? It maybe there's some, you're looking to do customer acquisition at a key segment, things like that. But this is your stepping stones of how you're actually getting to your big annual goals. This would be like on your fitness app. These are the things you're doing so you can be in a triathlon. So you're just saying these are the things we're trying to accomplish. Your quarterly KPIs are your vital signs. How healthy is my marketing plan to the business? You could be reporting on, well, we're running a little short on maybe retention goals, but we're getting ahead on this. This is where you want to be telling where you are. The tactical summary, you don't want to just give a list of what you've done, but you want to sort of put it in a bigger picture of how are these campaigns progressing? Give them the story. performance analysis is, hey, this is what you're talking about. Hey, we had some home runs here. We had some surprises. This is our learnings we had. And next steps, you want to really outline, what did you learn from this and how you're going to make adjustments you can actually hit your goals. But this is really the reporting you want to do. And it's always in service of what did you learn and how do you move the business forward some. And that's where it is. And probably now, the next most important thing is when you're doing that, when you're talking about this, every audience is a bit different in what they want to hear. So Jim, you're going to talk about how do you tee this up for all the different stakeholders marketing has?
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it. Yes, exactly. So I think this next section really is, okay, we've talked about the metrics and what's strategic and what's tactical and how to maintain that balance. And of course, the cadence of reporting those. This last section is the best way to communicate that to various stakeholders throughout the organization. And just thinking about this, I kind of recall a LinkedIn article I read recently from Carrie Lou Dietrich. It was a great, great article about how to communicate to executive stakeholders. And right at the top was a quote from Chandar, who's over at Workato, the CMO, which says, "Be the beacon, not the blizzard." That summarizes basically what you should be thinking about when you communicate up. Because at some point in your career, you're going to be asked to summarize these metrics and KPIs to the next level up. First to your boss, then to your boss's boss. Then it's going to be do a quarterly business review. Then it's going to be, hey, there were some interesting insights in there. I need you to add some slides to a board deck. Or even worse or better, hey, come in, join the next executive team meeting and talk to me a little bit about your programs and the insights you've gleaned. And when you're doing that, you got to keep a couple things in mind, right? First is time is the most precious resource to executives. They don't have a lot of time. They're not as knowledgeable as you will be about all of the details behind these metrics and KPIs. And the last is they don't want to have those details. They don't care. They're not as passionate as you are about your particular program that might be driving metrics, that wrote up the quick KPIs that contribute to a business objective. So it's really important to keep that in mind. You need to be succinct, focus on the why, tell the story behind the data, don't report on data itself, and be balanced. Don't just talk about what works, talk about what isn't working and what are you going to do about it. Here are 3 examples of stakeholders, the obvious candidates, and just to emphasize again how much we're focusing on reporting and metrics and business value, I have purposely used the world's worst stock photography. This is not about arts and crayons. This is about getting to the metrics. So we're going to talk today about the head of sales and what do they care about? Your CFO, the dreaded CFO, and of course the CEO on the board, some examples. So we'll just go ahead and jump into it. The first is a CEO cares about everything, right? They're responsible for caring about everything. They have to. Specifically for marketing, they're really thinking about what is driving overall growth of the business. Okay, how is your marketing strategy working? Not how your program is working, how this particular channel is working. How is the marketing strategy working? And that's sometimes the most difficult question to answer. When someone says, is our strategy working? There's no MarTech solution you log into to get an answer to that question. It really requires you have a handle on the business. They focus, of course, on the marketing ROI. What is the spend? How are we getting maximum impact for the spend? Is that spend decreasing per customer acquisition cost over time? Are you getting more efficient? And then finally, the CEO, more than anyone, I think, actually cares about your brand and brand perception, right? And whether or not that brand is differentiated in the market. It is the CEO who wants to have this vision carried through into the marketplace, right? The vision that separates this company. And so they will focus on things like brand. I put some example KPIs. I'm going to focus on the first one because I think it's an important one. This notion of customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value, or more specifically, the ratio of LTV to CAC. Because this is not something that you might be taught about when you're learning how to do marketing, you went to school for, etc. These are challenging metrics, and they basically are telling you what is the total fully loaded cost to acquire a new customer. That's all of sales and all of marketing. So your metrics and reporting are going to contribute to a higher level metric. You don't own all of that. And of course, customer lifetime value is, for as long as you can keep a customer, how much do they buy from you? So it's not the initial sale, it's a follow-on sales. its expansion, its growth, etc. These numbers are typically calculated in the finance team, right? In the CFO. But the reason why marketing is going to be asked about this is because we're such a contributor of the cost, of course, and the pipeline to generate this. You can think about this as a click above marketing ROI. Marketing ROI is what do you get for every marketing dollar you spend? Think about this as go-to-market ROI. And investors care deeply about this, especially in SaaS businesses. No SaaS business would be successful if it does not retain its customer for some period of time, usually 2, 3, 4 years you have to retain and expand that customer to build a profitable business. So this is an important one to get your arms around, understand it, and be able to talk at that level and how you contribute to it. If you go to the next one, which is your head of sales.
Try. There we go.
Another system here?
No, there we go.
Yeah, the head of sales. Okay, obviously clear stakeholder, right? Kathy just talked about how much marketing is aligned with sales and pipeline growth, etc. So of course they're going to want to know quality and volume of leads coming in and how many of those are qualified and whether they're a good fit and whether they meet certain criteria like old world BANT or some other way to calculate the quality of your engagements. Also going to ask about sales velocity and what marketing is doing to increase sales velocity or conversely shorten the sales cycle. Because this is a really important metric. It means for every new salesperson you hire, if you can shorten that sales cycle, you can bring in a lot more business, right? It's about sales efficiency, and marketing has a very large role to play there, not just with campaigns and your offers and thought leadership and content, but things like sales enablement and coaching and repositioning and sales decks and training and use of references and customer advocacy to shorten that sales cycle and speed sales. And then finally, really care about conversion rates. What campaigns are working? What are people responding to? What message? Because that same message has to be carried through the sales cycle for it to be efficient and high velocity. I'm going to focus specifically on a KPI. I've listed a number here. Of course, everyone wants to know number of leads, but what they really want to know is number of opportunities. And what they really want to know from the number of opportunities is the size of the pipeline. And if you go one click above that, what they really want to get to is there enough pipeline today to help us close deals in the future? Enterprise sales is 6, 9, sometimes 12 months. That means today you are building pipeline to close a year from now. And what most sales leaders care about is the volume of the pipeline that you built enough to guarantee us that we'll hit our number at a 3-to-1 close rate or a 4-to-1 close rate. So focusing on the pipeline you build is important, but it's really the balance that makes it different in most modern software organizations. So that idea of pipeline balance is an important one to get your arms around. And then the last one here, of course, is the CFO, as I said, the dreaded CFO. Marketing and CFOs and the finance team has sometimes a love-hate relationship. I think if you deal with marketing budgets, you're probably familiar with that. Now, of course, the CFO cares about CAC and LTV because they're hearing a lot from the board about efficiency and they're responsible for managing the profitability of business. So it's important. That's definitely going to go to ROI on marketing campaigns. $1 in yields how many out? Okay, that's an important thing. And then finally, they're going to really think about how quickly can we recoup the marketing spend, right? What is the payback period? And how can we use this to optimize the cash flow of the business? Because there's no other department across the modern organization, enterprise, that has a big chunk of discretionary dollars attached to it. That is just marketing. And if you're not measuring these things, that big chunk of discretionary dollars is going to get raided by the CFO really quickly. I think we've all experienced that over the last several years in this market. Now, one KPI that I think we want to focus on here is budget utilization and forecast accuracy, which can be a complicated thing. A lot of us get into marketing because we're good at writing, or we're good at coming up with ideas, or we're super creative. But one of the things you must learn as a marketer is to focus on your budget utilization and forecast accuracy. That means how close to the forecasted budget do you actually come in any given period? Modern accounting rules means they're gonna count that cost, the dollars that come out of marketing is when it gets consumed in the period of time, when the activity takes place. But as we know, with many, many marketing campaigns, we have to use accruals to track that over time. Don't underestimate how important it is to be aligned with your finance team such that you have a planned budget, you have a forecasted budget, and you have an actual budget, and all of those are accurate to within 1%. Marketers, as a rule, tend to play it conservative. There's not many marketers. I've known a few in my lifetime, and they, they had some challenges. There's not many marketers that just blow their budgets. What actually happens is the opposite. They play it too conservative because they don't want to go over budget, and that means there's opportunity costs, right? It's for every dollar you underspend, that's pipeline that could have been generated, and sometimes that can be just as deadly to a marketer, right? Focus on budget utilization and your forecast accuracy. It's a really important metric for the relationship with the CFO. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Kathy.
And Jim, that was beautiful. But as we know, things can go wrong. There are pitfalls. And the first one that I see come up a lot is, I think it's just this missed corporate connection, what we've been talking about, is I call it sort of the but why trap. You know, it's like the toddler that keeps asking you, why this, why? It's like you go in and you just start saying, oh, our event broke all records, our email open rates are through the roof. And someone's going to ask you, so how does that contribute to our goal of increasing our footprint and a customer by 15%? And you just hear crickets. They don't want to hear how you're spending your time. They want to know how you're contributing. The next one is, I call it the channel obsession. And I think it just naturally happens in marketing. To do SEO, SEM, digital advertising, social events, you end up having to be an expert in that. And that reality ends up driving teams built around channel expertise. And when you have a team, you give up budgets by team. And then how are you going to evaluate me, my performance is by how well I'm managing my channel. So you get lots of channel reports. I want to keep my budget. But if you're getting asked questions like, how's our social channel performing? You're having the wrong conversation. You need to be rolling all of that up into, how do my campaign contribute to that 15% expansion? And I think because we get organized how we hand out budget, we end up doing a lot of channel or that activity reporting, the one I showed you at the bottom. They don't really care how you're spending your day. They don't want to hear, which leads to the next one. Did we do what we said we would do? You know, we love to report on, hey, we did 40 events this month. We sent out 4,000 emails. And again, it's like you're focusing on the wrong thing. They want to know how you're contributing. Give them a clear sight of sight between a clear line of sight between what you're doing and what you need to be accomplishing. Now, the next two I think are very different. I call this the cherry picking. And essentially, I call it the marketing metrics roulette. And somehow we always spin and have great metrics to report on. Oh, the event did a great job. Oh, we got in touch. These customers are engaging. It doesn't serve you well. When you're developing your presentation for executives, I think you have to make a shift in your mindset from being a practitioner of marketing, where you're in promotional mode, to being a critical leader, a leader in a critical business function. You need to be just talking about the facts and context of the business. So you want to report on results, not activities. You want to show relationships of what you're doing to the goals, the business outcomes. You got to communicate value in business terms, and you've got to provide context. And the marketers that make that shift do well. And if you don't, it's going to catch you out at some point. They're going to say, how does this tie to it? Or suddenly when you don't hit your number, when you've been just rah for the first 3 quarters, this doesn't work well. And I see this one, the first I think more around activity, this is just you cherry pick. And the last one I put in all capital letters, because I'll just tell you, this is the holy grail of marketing headaches to me. It is like, what raindrop caused the flower to grow? It's just like, we have first touch, we have last touch, we have multi-link, we have did the email influence the social? Did social influence our email rate? It's like, there is no such thing as a perfect attribution model. There is not. And I could talk for probably a whole other webinar about that. What I think we want to focus on this is how do you build models that help you make better decisions, that show you trends, show you patterns. The best marketing reports don't report on what happened, but it should tell you what should happen next. And I think we get too caught up into marketing sourced or what channel did this, and it's not the channel. You want to do efficiency on your channels, but it's the campaigns you want to talk about. Jim, just what you're talking about. What do you talk about with your CFO, your CEO, or your CRO? It just makes a huge difference. And I think marketers do this in themselves with this whole thing. And then the last one is just sort of, we've covered the last 3 webinars. The first one was workshop 1. How do you do your annual plan on a page? It's an easy, the best way we've seen to summarize and articulate the plan and actually communicate throughout the organization. Workshop 2 is how do you turn that into action? How do you turn that into your campaign plan, your quarterly plan? And the last one is, how do you prove the viability and impact of your plan and your team's efforts? And so with that, Jess, I'm going to turn it back to you for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. So with that, I want to thank you, Kathy, Shelley, and Jim, not just for today's session, but for this entire workshop series. There's been a lot of knowledge shared through shared experience of the 3 of you. And, today really culminated in you can have the best plan, you can, execute on it well for marketing, but if you can't truly articulate the impact that that is having, it's going to cause problems for you and your organization. So, and really walking away from today thinking about, what are the key levels of reporting that you're missing today, right? Are you too top-down heavy? Are you too bottoms up? Are you not speaking to the CFO the right way? Those sorts of things are going to be really important. But I think the other most important thing, as Kathy brought up, was really around, how do you take these metrics and this data and these insights and turn them into future activity? How are you going to adapt your program throughout the year? How are you going to pick up on trends that you need to adapt to? So thank you all very much for all of your insights over the course of this workshop series. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to Q&A. I see that some of you have already submitted some questions, but if you haven't, the little Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to drop your questions in there. All right, so let me go ahead and get started. So the first question we're going to ask here is, I would say, almost a controversial one, but I have a feeling you all will have some very real opinions on, which is, do you think that marketing has in fact become too data-driven?
Oh, Jim, this is yours.
Yeah.
And I'll weigh in. Go ahead.
Thanks for that. I'm not sure if the question is framed totally right. It's not a question whether it's too data-driven or not. It's whether or not some of the focus of marketing has swung too far to metrics and far away from things like the message, the brand, etc. And I would say, myself, my own opinion, yes. I mean, if you're in marketing, especially in technology or software marketing, all you see is these pendulums swing back and forth over the course of the career. And I would say, it used to be all arts and crafts, all about the brand, all about the message, all about the visuals. And that did a great disservice, right, to the practice of marketing, right? We had to shake that reputation, but then something happened. Everything went digital. And then we bought this whole tech infrastructure to try and engage and manage our marketing through digital channels. And we get a flood of data. And now we're buried in the data and we're trying to parse out through these crazy attribution models and a perfect science for marketing where everything can be measured, and it just cannot. Much of marketing has nothing to do with the data. It has to do with the emotions behind marketing. And so I kind of see that, and it's starting to swing back. If you go through LinkedIn, you'll see these debates and articles. I just read one yesterday about demand versus brand and what is the right balance between them and how do they contribute to one another and what do you measure on each side, and is it okay if something is not measurable but it's the right thing to do because you get the emotional reaction you want from your audience. And I think we're moving towards a healthier balance between those things right now.
All right. Any other 2 cents from anybody, or should we move on to our next
He
question?
was so articulate. I have nothing to add, which is, I know, surprising.
It's just stunned silence. Got it.
I know.
Excellent. All right. So the next question here, which I think now we're kind of getting into the how-tos of all this stuff, which I think is really interesting. So how do you deal with difficult stakeholders who always want more from you? Right? Like, and I think, while it gets to today's session, I think this kind of goes back through the entire workshop series, right? You're always going to have that difficult stakeholder who's always going to ask you to prove more or pivot or do whatever. So, how do you deal with those stakeholders?
I've had those stakeholders in my lifetime. So
They'll
I
be unnamed on this webinar, though,
they
right?
absolutely will be. But, I do think you're spot on, Jessica, about it going back to some of the beginning, because I think what we've talked about is you have to have a plan that you get buy-on from those stakeholders in the very beginning. So if you've sort of walked that talk, then when it comes to reporting against it and they're talking about shifts or they're talking about progress that they want to see more of, but they've agreed to something else, I think you just have to remind them. You have to pull out the sheet and go, okay, I hear you. I just want to bring it back. Like if I recall, this is what we agreed to. So as some now we all understand things shift. So there could be situations where you do need to pivot, but I do think you don't lose sight of what you agreed to. And then that pivot needs to take into account things like resources and budget and things that are available to you at wherever you are in the year. So there has to be a good, healthy conversation that does point them back to what the agreement was. And then if there are modifications, you need to do that collaboratively together.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelley.
Mhm.
All right. Wow, we've got a flood of questions coming in. So I'm gonna go ahead and start tackling these. So an interesting one here. It's important to annual planning to align to sales target, account pyramids, ICP, marketing segments, market segments, right? Sales rep territories, those sorts of things. How do you advise that you negotiate that sort of planning and alignment? Jim, you
Yeah,
look like
You're probably
you
in the
look like you're
middle of
ready to
that
say
now.
something.
I
Yeah,
think
go
we're all in the
for it.
middle of this. If you're on an annual plan, you're all in the middle of this. Matter of fact, I'm going to get off this call and then in about an hour, I'm going to get on a call with our head of revenue operations to look at what the model looks like for next year. And that model is, all right, we need to achieve this bookings rate, and that bookings are going to come from net new. And then outside of that, it's going to come from our expand, which includes upgrades, which also might include new division business. Oh, and then we're going to do that across these industries and these sales teams with this expected conversion rate. So going to go through all of that process. So to answer your question, number one, I would recommend that you check out each of the resources that are on the screen in front of you. If you don't have the QR code, visit our websites and check it out. I know the blueprint that we produce has a very specific set of steps that you go through to have an interlock between the top-down plan, your annual objectives and strategies with the bottom-up campaign planning, and that tug of war that happens over budgets between top-down allocation and bottom-up estimates. So it has like definitive steps there. I definitely recommend you do that. Second is look for a very strong person in revenue ops, and if not, a strong interlock between sales ops and marketing ops. That's absolutely necessary. So that would be my recommendation. Get early on that process because it's going to require a bunch of back and forth and assumptions and modeling and testing and data and everything else. Don't wait till December to figure out what your plan objectives and targets are going to be for the following year.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. A bit of a follow-up on that is, okay, so how do you actually derive your marketing targets from the revenue targets, right? Now, the question here is, what are the typical multipliers and conversions? I think your answer is going to be there aren't typical. They're typical for your business, but I will toss it over to my experts to flesh out that answer a little bit more.
Go ahead, Jim, you're on a roll with this one, but I mean, I'll definitely agree with,
Take all
there's
the-
only typical for your business, and that changes a lot also, but go for it, Jim.
Yeah, well, forget my prior answer on data-driven marketing. This is like all data. It's all, this is no subjectivity, it's all data. So obviously you got to look at your historical data to actually figure out what your conversion rates, and those conversion rates are going to vary just within your business by segments and the product you're selling and everything else. Outside of your business, those conversion rates dramatically differ depending on the type of market you're in. Are you in an established category? Are you a competitor in a thriving red ocean? Are you trying to create a new category? You have an evangelistic market, then you have to make different assumptions on what your conversion and close rates are going to be in that type of situation. Again, the more data you can bring from how your business is operated to inform the plan moving forward, the better. Outside of that, there are plenty of resources available that allow you at least to plug some assumptions on conversion rates. You know, an average 4-to-1 pipeline to covered close ratio is a good place to start. Modify from there based on your experience and the unique aspects of your business.
So I love this. All these questions I feel like are feeding off of each other, or they're feeding off of your answers. I'm not sure which it is, Jim, but the next one really is, and you know, what I've seen a lot of leadership kind of get into a bad habit of is, okay, our normal conversion rate is 3-to-1, but miraculously next year to hit our goals, we're suddenly going to have a, 2-to-1, right? Not sure how, but just, that's how we have to do it to make the numbers work, right? So this next question really is, well, corporate goals are unrealistic, right? So that you'd have to do some unnatural acts like suddenly change your conversion, increase your conversion rate 100%, right? So, how do you take that top down and try and fit it into the models that we're talking about? How do you, if at all, get between the top down and the bottoms up to make sense of all of this? Where like, is it okay to like call out and go, hey, here's what we typically do. Here's the delta, right, between your top down and what we can do from the bottoms up, right? How do you address that with kind of your core, I guess, probably executive leadership team? Anyone? We're putting
We've
poor
all
Jen on
had
the
it.
spot here, Kathy, Shelley.
Well, I mean, I could say I've had one before, and it was some number that the company had never achieved before in their life. And I was like, what makes you think suddenly we're going to do 5 times what we ever did with a new product? And I think it goes back to difficult stakeholders, the CFO. It's trying to get something more realistic to see if you can track. But sometimes that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. I mean,
And
Jim and
I do
Shelley.
think it's always good to show like what you have been tracking to,
Yeah.
like try to base them in reality of what you have been doing, and then encourage them to look at an incremental increase over that so that you're showing them with the data, here's how we have performed. We're going to look to do this. We're going to be more efficient here. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that is. And we anticipate we could have a stretch goal to this. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I understand that sometimes you just have to put the number that they want that number to be. But personally, I would always anchor them back to we can have that at the tip of the thermometer, but we're going to also show sort of what we're trying to get to realistically so that we can track to something that makes more sense for the team.
Yeah, I think those are good answers. I would add, again, this is another one where data helped a ton. Like at the most strategic level of your business, again, I'm talking software primarily, what investors care about, and therefore the executive team cares about, is the delicate balance between growth rate and profitability, right? The rule of 40. What's your revenue growth rate and what's your EBITDA growth rate? And that is a whack-a-mole situation. So if you're given a growth rate that you're like, we've never been able to achieve that, this is a 10% increase in our growth rate, then the next question you ask is, what are we giving on EBITDA? What are we willing to invest to get us there? Right? That's what that conversation has. And then it becomes a little bit more of a strategic conversation about, okay, if we want to grow this percent, we've never done that, then are we going to go negative on the EBITDA? Like, where are we going to take the money from earnings and pour that in to achieve that growth rate? And that is determined by the valuation of your company based on what's happening in the market at any given time. So that's
Yep.
not always an easy conversation to have, but that is the reality, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Unfortunately, I hate keep putting you on the spot, Jim, but I know you have an answer for this. So how do you justify a brand building program or an influencer program that doesn't have demonstrable direct ROI or the metrics the CEO really cares about? How do you articulate that impact to prove its value so you can continue investing in something like that?
Yeah, this is a tough question. This is similar to, it's somewhat related to how do you deal with difficult stakeholders, right? And what I mean by that is, I would advise strongly everyone when they're considering a marketing job to ask the person that's hiring, what is the definition of good marketing? How do you know good marketing when you see it? It's a really good question to ask in the interview process, because if you get someone that's just going to say great leads, tons of lead generation, lots of pipeline, blah, 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 you kind of realize, all right, you're a bit in a box here. It's going to make it really hard for you to experiment. Again, I've been reading a lot of these articles about what is the balance between these things. And a recent one I said in B2B, this article sponsored by LinkedIn that came out recently in B2B, you should spend up to 45% of your program's budget on brand building efforts, right? And the rest on demand efforts, which it's shocking to me. It seems like, wow, that's a lot in brand. And the reason was that you must increase your share of voice, and you have to increase your share of voice at a greater rate than your competitors are doing in order to hit your growth objectives, to win market share in any particular category. And that's not consumer spend, that's also business to business spend. So it's challenging. There's a bunch of reference material out there today to make a case for brand building. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful on convincing someone that's strictly by the numbers and just looking at lead gen, that is a worthwhile spend. The only alternative to that, I think, is take some of that budget, squirrel it away, and run some experiments. Run some experiments. I would not advise, if you're in a situation where you can't convince someone that building brand is important, to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to run this huge test and spend a couple $100,000 and see how it goes this year. It's probably not a good way to go about it. There's ways that you can run smaller influencer campaigns specific to products or buyer types or personas or markets, just to at least get some data.
Cool. All right. Wow, the questions keep flowing in. Sorry, guys, you're on the hook here until the top of the hour. All right. So, can you speak a bit about the relationship between marketing and product management and the conversation that needs to happen between them during annual planning? Shelley or Kathy, I want to give Jim a break here.
Okay, Shelley, you look like you had your hand up ready to.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's always a fun one, because I do think that product marketers are typically on the hook for driving demand for the product that they support. So they have very close relationships with the sales leaders in those areas, and that's where their focus is. And sometimes, whatever solution they may be attached to may not be the one that in your bigger objectives you're actually trying to drive demand and traffic for. So those can be challenging conversations, because they usually want to also drive a product focused conversation versus a customer pain point conversation. So I think that you have to try and do some negotiating there, because I do think that there is a place for those kinds of conversations and for their need to drive certain numbers. But I think it's also one of those people it's a stakeholder that you have to share your overall plan, because you need to give them context. If you have to tell them no, or I can't do as much, you need to give them the reasons why you can't do that, so that they at least understand the larger picture. Now, I'm not saying it's going to make them go away and that they're going to be happy about it, but at least there is some facts for them to be able to understand why they're getting the no, or to maybe go talk to others in the organization to try and recruit more dollars. Because sometimes I've been in situations where that has happened, but the sales teams have actually come up with dollars out of their budget to contribute to marketing initiatives that would support their team. So those are creative things that you can do, and also things that you can ask them. Say, hey, I'd really love to support that. We don't actually have the budget, but here's what that might look like. And can you go get the dollars? So there are a few things that you can do, I think, as it relates to that. I don't know, Kathy, if you've had any other experiences that would add to that.
Not to add to it, just
Okay.
always the not all products are created equal.
That's
I've done the
exactly
same
right.
things you have done. Yeah.
Love it. All right, Kathy, this one should be in your wheelhouse. So marketing is moving towards account funnels, as we know, we talk about a lot day to day here at Inverta. So while MQL to lead and meeting to MQL or MQL to meeting like conversions are important to measuring operational efficiency, it's not the best reflection of effectiveness. I think we would all agree with that. So how do you shift to an account funnel conversions at perhaps a CEO level? Or do you, would be kind of the
I
question.
think that's to me, moving from this, Kerry Cunningham said it back, the MQL industrial complex to more this account focus. That's going to be a transition. We have so much infrastructure and process built around the MQL. I don't think it's going away, but what do you layer on top of that? And I think you get back to, you have to have the data to start to show. And we've done some of this for clients where if you start to look at the number of just engagements that you've had or responses at an account, no surprise, over time, those are the accounts that deliver most. And so I think you have to go with the data to start to tell that story, and then what's your plan to slowly get there. But we have trained every CFO in B2B about MQLs and the whole funnel, and that's all they know. And until you give them something else they know that they can do their calcs on, it's the CFO and then the CEOs, because that's most of them don't come up through marketing. So this is something they can really hang their hat on. I understand now. This is how I measure it. And so we've done it to ourselves. And so I think that's just a transition. And you've got to start collecting that data to show how this is a better predictor. Because all CFOs want and CEOs is predictable revenue. Like this does not help them in revenue. This does. And so if you get them that and show the data that says this is a better way to predict it, I think you get people on board. But then it's the whole thing about changing how you handle your sales force, your lead flow. I mean, then there's other things to actually, operationalize it.
Yeah, it's not a small shift.
Not a small shift. No.
Okay, one last question. This is going to be the lightning round. So what is everybody's view on sourced versus influenced marketing contribution? I think Kathy, you covered
Can I
this.
just start with the marketing? That is the holy grail of marketing headaches. It's
Right.
like you're just asking for a fight. You spend more time claiming credit that you could put that energy actually trying to generate revenue.
It's
like-
true, but a lot of companies are still forcing that conversation. So, the question here is what percentage would you be looking for on each? Once again, I think that's going to be what has your historical percentages been within the organization and
And
but
how do you define it? Every company defines it differently.
right. Ugh. Yes, very true.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
just,
If
for
someone would like that,
practical-
I had this conversation yesterday for 30 minutes and I have a follow-up now with this person on Friday for an hour. I'm happy to have a one-off conversation with anyone on source, influence, and attribution. Go ahead, Jim.
I'll just say two things on that. Like, I can't get into the percentages. I'm very skeptical of
Yeah.
source in general. I think everything's an influence, and if you have a single touch that leads to a great win, it just means that your marketing, the marketing had some impact that you simply can't measure, and it wasn't captured in some form or digital touch or something else, right? Or it's the words of your customers talking out there, or someone read something online or whatever. So I'm a little skeptical of that. I will say, going back to kind of that section I did on like speaking to people at the executive level, keep the conversations on marketing source versus influence in marketing only. Don't bring that conversation to the broader team. Don't claim it like the company builds pipeline, right? And this is how much pipeline we built, and we are at or above what we need for balance and for pipeline build and for funnel losses and the conversion of velocity. But you don't get into like, but if you look at this one that came from this particular form on our website, it converts much. Oh my God, look at these demo request forms. They're great conversion rates. Maybe we should put more of those all over the website. It's kind of a ridiculous conversation to have, especially outside of the walls of marketing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you on that note. Appreciate it. Thank you again to everybody, to all three of our presenters. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for one or all of this workshop series. I know there's a few of you out here who have been with us for all 3 hours of this, so thank you. And if you have any questions about Uptempo or Inverta, we're both on LinkedIn. We're both on, obviously, the web. Kathy, Jim, and Shelly are all easily findable on LinkedIn. So make those connections and good luck with your planning. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.